Welcome to my podcast, Shaping Your Journey. My name is Aldo Mazza, percussionist, drummer, inviting you to listen in on conversations with friends, artists, professionals, and experts in the music world. Today, I have the special privilege and honor of having Ed Soph in our conversation, Shaping Your Journey, and talking a little bit about his trajectory and what brought him to where he is. It's always a journey, a voyage. So thank you so much, Ed, for joining me on this one.
Pleasure to be with you and see you again, Aldo. Definitely.
Yes, I have. I mean, before I go into, I know interestingly how we met, and you've always been a kind of a mentor and a great person to be around. But before that, would you mind just filling us in a little bit of your background? Way back, where it all started?
Well, it all started uh, in the home. My father was a jazz lover and played records in the house all the time, and he liked New Orleans music. So I grew up initially hearing people like Louis Armstrong and Sidney Bechet, and the drummers like Zutty Singleton and Baby Dodds. So I one day he came home from work with a wood block and a pair of sticks and put me on the floor, and he played ragtime piano for a hobby, and he started playing a rag and looked down at me and said, "Okay, come on, play with me." So I had an idea, probably pretty thin idea about how it was supposed to sound because I'd been listening to Baby Dodds and heard him play wood blocks and wood hoops and all that kind of stuff. So that's where it started. And then my dad bought me a kiddie drum, little tiny snare drum with thumb screws for tension rods. And long story short, by the time I was 15, I had a drum set that my grandfather had given me for Christmas. And I started playing with professional musicians in Houston. And that happened because my dad would take me to a jam session on Sunday afternoons. And one Sunday we went, and I knew the drummer, a very nice man named Dave Berry. And Dave came over after the first set and asked me if I wanted to sit in. Well, if the earth had opened up right then, I would have jumped into the hole and disappeared because it was like, oh my God. And I said something like, well, oh, thanks. I just really want to listen and blah, blah, blah. My father leaned over and said, if you don't get up and play, you can forget about ever seeing your drums again. Yeah. So now I was used to playing with people, but only on records. All right. So I'd never, and these people were all old enough to be my father, maybe some of them my grandfather, and they were all seasoned jazz musicians who had already had extensive careers in other parts of the country and had come back to Houston, which was their home. Saxophonist named Arnett Cobb, a alto saxophonist named Jimmy Ford, just great musicians and great people. So I went up and sat in, and after the first tune, I thought, well, I'm gonna get up and go sit down, and the leader turned around and said, "Oh man, cool, no, don't go, play again, play again." And I realized that, yeah, my nervousness disappeared as soon as I started playing because I felt like I was playing with records again, only I didn't know what the guys were going to play, obviously. But so that one thing led to another. And all through high school, I was working after hours jam sessions with, with guys much older than myself. And they mentored me. And it was probably the most important, or one of the most important parts of my musical education, because between hearing the music at home from a very young age and being exposed after Louis Armstrong, I was exposed to Dizzy Gillespie and Charlie Parker, and after those people, I was exposed to Thelonious Monk and Charles Mingus. So by the time I graduated high school and went to North Texas, I had pretty much internalized a history of the styles of music at the time. This is before world music. The closest that it came to that was what Dizzy was doing with Chano Ponzo,
Right.
doing the Manteca and that sort of thing, but nothing like it is now. But at any rate, that was how I got started, and it just, when you look back on it, you just say, wow. I mean, I never said to myself I want to be a drummer. It just sort of happened, you know.
Right. Yeah. Interesting that you mentioned the fact that you played along with records a lot, and this is coming up a lot in my conversations with other friends. I had a conversation with Chester Thompson, who said the same
Mm,
thing. His whole before he played with anybody in person live, he had spent a
mm-hmm.
great deal of time playing the records, and I remember
Sure.
doing that myself. I mean, I was playing not necessarily jazz. I was more into the pop and rock stuff, but
Hmm.
I ate it all up and playing. And anybody who came to town, I went to see them. I played to all the records. I knew that repertoire. So when I became serious, I mean, serious in the sense going to university and studying percussion and all of that, I already had a background of playing with people, knowing how to listen. I just didn't
Exactly.
know how to. I was not a mallet player. I was not a timpanist. I was not a classical player. But I really wanted this badly, so I really worked for it. But I had the right preparation, which is interesting because that really helps a lot. Knowing the repertoire, right?
Of
I mean,
course, of course. And it's when I was playing with records, I did not have a. I had what was called a hi-fi system. My parents had. This is for the young folks who might be listening in. And we played records, 33 and a third long playing records, and we wore those things out. My generation. But the good thing about it was this was before high-tech headphones. And of course, I didn't even know what a headphone was. So I was forced, but it wasn't an evil force, it was a good force to play. I learned to play with dynamics right from the get go because that stereo would only get too loud. And if I cranked it up too much, the neighbors would complain because our house wasn't air conditioned at this time. The windows were open in the summertime and in the spring. And the neighbors would come over and say, "Is your kids making too much noise, Mrs. Soph? Please ask." So I learned to play softly. And that, boy, that was a great, great uh, plus for me and my generation is that most of us wanted to play loud and fast. But then when we had played along with records, we realized that there was more to drumming than playing loudly and fast.
right, right.
And it's Jack DeJeanette came to when I was teaching at North Texas. He came to school and gave a clinic. And one of the students asked Jack if he had ever played along with records, and he laughed. And he said, "Oh my God, I drove my mom crazy. She'd have to unplug the record machine in the living room because I'd play with records all day long." And the kids, those just had a look of disbelief, even though their teacher, of course, had told them all along that all that was one of the prime educational experiences. And Jack finished that and he turned to walk back towards his drums. Then he whipped around and he said, "And I'll let you in on a secret. I still practice with records."
Yeah, yeah. That's beautiful,
Yeah,
and I think it's an important one because now, I mean, you can call them up at any time on your phone on any device. But I
yeah,
don't see that much playing with records, especially my own students. I have to suggest it and I have to like bring it up and I have to actually do it because they don't
yeah.
necessarily do it intuitively. Um,
Right.
but I had a question for you. Like you and I mean, the first time I ever saw you play was with the Woody Herman Band. I was still living in Ottawa. This was before my university days. You came through with Woody Herman. And as I said, I would go out and see anything that moved that had anything to do with music, whether it was Woody Herman or Weather Report or Yes or whatever. And I remember the big band. I mean, it was amazing. And you had just recorded Giant Steps. That's right.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
And it was fresh. I think you had just recorded it. It hadn't been released yet. when you were playing at this club, and I heard because I had heard the song Giant Steps before. I wasn't into jazz so much, but I really wanted to hear everything. And then seeing you with that band, I remember you were switching cymbals for different songs, and I couldn't understand why you would switch your ride cymbal.
Uh-huh.
What was that?
Well, probably if a part of playing in a big band, and to a degree, and obviously in a small group too, is you learn how to orchestrate. And everybody has a different way of thinking about orchestration. There are some drummers like Kenny Clark and Tony Williams uh, who primarily played one cymbal all the time, but could get all sorts of different sounds and textures out of that cymbal. That was a form of orchestration. Then, in a big band situation, from my perspective, this is not a matter of right or wrong. This is just a matter of personal taste and personal improvisational concepts. That if I'm playing in the band, I have, and I learned this later on, I had it put into words by Mel Lewis, because Mel told me, he said, I said, explain your cymbal setup to me. And he says, well, this cymbal over here sounds really good behind the trumpet solos. He says, this swish over here is great behind sax solos. And my main ride is great for the full ensemble and brass solos. And he says, this isn't carved in stone, but this is how I think about my palette of cymbal colors that I have. Plus, of course, Mel frequently used his hi-hat for reinforcing figures, playing his hi-hat with his stick. So I was very highly influenced by Mel in terms of orchestration, and by Buddy Rich in terms of time feel. And that Buddy was always very much on top of the beat, and that was almost a given in Woody's band. But as far as orchestration and things went, Buddy was one of those drummers who played that one ride cymbal all the time. It
Right.
was either ride cymbal or hi-hat. He had a swish in his later years, but to my knowledge, or at least I had never heard him ride on it. I heard him punctuate figures with it. So I switched cymbals because I thought, hey, piano solo, I'm going to do this. It's a lower dynamic level, so I'm going to use a softer cymbal, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So then on the other hand, when I was coming up, playing in some small groups, I would change cymbals on the bridge of the tune behind the soloist. And I had a soloist, a horn player back in New York, ask me, hey man, don't change cymbals on my solo. It changes my solo. I don't want you to, I want that sound throughout my solo. I want that to be a constant. So I realized, like anything else, when you're dealing with improvisation, anything goes. It's not a matter of something being right or wrong. It's a matter of something being appropriate or inappropriate, depending upon the music that you're playing with and the people you're playing it with. So, open ears and open mind. That became my philosophy. Because things that in the past I told my students never to do, sure enough, some down the road later on, I heard some great masterful drummer do it, and it sounded great.
Nice.
You know?
Now, were you a student when you got into the band, Woody Herman's band?
No, that was my graduation present.
Wow, explain this one.
Well, I graduated from North Texas in 1968. And that year, while I was still in school, Cannonball Adderley came just to hang out. He was playing in Dallas, and he and his brother Nat came up to school just to hear the band. And when he left, he went to a jazz festival in Mexico City, and he ran into Woody Herman. And evidently, Woody told Cannonball, I'm looking for a drummer. So Cannonball said, well, there's this young cat in North Texas you ought to check out. And next thing I know, I'm in my last semester at school, and the phone rings, and it's the road manager of Woody's band, Bill Byrne. And he said, we'd like you to join the band. And I said, really? He said, yeah, Cannonball Adderley recommended you. I said, okay. And I'd already done my homework. I knew the basic repertoire really well. And of course, the one thing that just scared the bejesus out of me was first time of playing that super fast tune of what he's called Caledonia, which usually started at quarter note equals 400 and rushed from there. But I was ready for it. I was ready. I was prepared. And Woody told me that he liked it because he said most drummers your age have no trouble playing the new type of music, the rock charts and the Chick Corea charts, the Blood, Sweat, and Tears charts that the band was doing back then, which I could handle. But he said so few drummers your age can play the old stuff. So that's what kept me in the gig. And that's why Woody had such a difficulty finding drummers, is because he couldn't find guys who had a wide repertoire stylistically, which that band represented. You know, because Woody was very young at heart and always looking for new things, new players, new writers. He was not at all comfortable staying in the good old days.
Right. Yeah.
So he needed drummers who could really cover the stylistic spectrum. And nice. I learned that at North Texas because we played everything under the sun.
Yeah, which is a good thing. And I remember seeing, thinking back when I saw the band. I mean, Giant Steps alone. You guys played that really fast.
Yeah, it was a fast start. Yeah.
Yeah, and I remember when I left there, I was just so blown away by big band. But in my mind, a big band was this older music. But Woody was, into a lot of different things, and you're definitely shining in this. And then fast forward, I remember I met you when I went to because I used to go to these camps all the time. The percussion camps, Jamie Aebersold camps,
right.
And with you and Lou Marini. And I remember all the coaching that you were giving me, and I was trying to find how the whole swing thing, and because coming from a rock background, and also in university, I didn't have a drum teacher. There was no jazz program yet at the university. So I was in a classical program, but I was a rock drummer, right? But I loved this, and I really wanted to do it. And I loved playing timpani. So I was like eating it all up and going to camps and trying to make up for it. I'd also go to New York almost every month to study. So coming to the Aebersold camps, I mean, it was great. I remember getting a lot of the coaching from you, and you answered a lot of questions that, I mean, not that I resolved it right away, but but you were on everybody, and it had to be right, and it used to drive me crazy because I said, "Oh no, here's Ed. Oh, he's gonna kill me."
I teach the way I teach myself. I'm hard on myself too.
No,
I learned that from the teacher I had at North Texas. It was a gentleman named Tommy Gwynn, who was a consummate player on all the instruments. He was asked to join the Chicago Symphony by Fritz Reiner on timpani. Wow. He was asked to be the first drummer in the Tonight Show band.
Wow.
When Buddy Rich was with Dorsey's band and couldn't make a gig, they'd fly Tommy in to sub for him. And that's the kind of chops Tommy had. He had Buddy Rich chops and played that, on the edge, very exciting player. But he was hell on wheels when it came to teaching. If you walked in and you weren't prepared, he'd look at you and he'd say, here you are preparing for a career and you don't even have the self-discipline to practice. Get the hell out of here.
Oh,
of course, if you did that today in a lot of schools, they'd say, Mr. Soph, you need to go to an anger management class or something like that. But no, he was right. And we all respected him so much and that we wanted to please him. And he had such high standards that he passed that on to his students. Anybody can do anything half-assed.
Yeah. No, but you're right about having the a teacher that you respect, and of the level. I mean, I had the same experience. Pierre Beluse was my
Oh my God!
teacher. Yeah, you
Wow.
know, and and it was amazing because he was in the Montreal Symphony, but he was also a jazz drummer who used to play the clubs, and he was a great jazz
Uh-huh.
drummer, but so demanding that in my first year, I probably broke down half a dozen times because, he said, "You're here." Same kind of thing, but he wouldn't send me away. He would just torture me the whole hour.
Oh God!
I don't know which is better, but
Oh Lord!
but it was, it was an awful experience, but a good one because those guys like that, like, Gwen, for you,
Uh,
I mean, what I'm hearing is, I mean, when you have that level of musicianship, that level of professionalism, and they take their responsibility really seriously, then it can't be any other way. You're
exactly.
here to do this, and I'm going to do it, and even if it kills you and me, you know.
Yeah, you're 100% right.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I mean, having guys like that around you, it's just amazing. And what I remember way back having a long conversation with Vic Firth. He was a drum set player,
Right.
and so was Louis Charbonneau, who is the Montreal Symphony timpanist for 50
Mhm.
years, and he was one of the great timpanists of the world. So a lot of these guys who were classically trained and went to a very high level were also drum set players, but decided to focus on one thing, or I mean, you can't always do everything. So, but
No,
it's
it's interesting.
go ahead.
The current timpanist with the Dallas Symphony, and before that, I believe he was in Detroit, is a gentleman named Brian Jones, and he played drum set in the 1 O'Clock Lab Band at North Texas.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, look at
So
Harvey Mason. Same thing.
yeah,
You know,
same thing.
and
Kenny Aronoff studied timpani at Boston U.
yeah,
Yeah.
and he almost got the gig with the Israel Philharmonic.
Oh,
He
I
was,
didn't know that.
yeah, yeah, yeah. And I remember getting back to Harvey Mason. I remember Vic Firth was telling me way back in one of these PASIC conferences. He says, because I had just heard Harvey Mason play percussion, classical percussion, and I never didn't know he played that because I knew Harvey Mason from Herbie Hancock,
Right. Sure.
that whole thing, and we were eating that up, and all of a sudden
Yeah.
I'm hearing him play chimes, timpani, and all of these things in concert, and I
Mhm.
was just totally confused, right?
Yeah.
So in my conversation with Vic Firth, Vic said, I tried to tell Harvey that, why do you insist on studying classical percussion? You're such a great drummer. You're touring the world with all the top guys. But Harvey had it in his head that he wanted to study, and he did it. And went to LA, did all the studio work. Two different persons. I had the drum set with Bob James and otherwise, and then all the movie work and all the other stuff. And it made him such a more musical player, right?
Yeah. That's the whole thing. When I was in high school, I was in an outfit called the Houston All City Symphony Orchestra, and it was directed by a man named Harry Lance, who was a classical cellist. And Harry was like Tommy Gwynn. It's you do your best, or you don't do anything. And I mean, rehearsals, the poor man, he'd be just drenched in sweat, and somebody would do something really stupid, and he'd throw his baton down on the and start, God, blank, blank, blankety, blank, blank, blank. And but again, we respected him so much, and the orchestra was so good that people like Stokowski, who at the time was conducting the Houston Symphony, would come in just for fun and conduct us. Sir Thomas Beecham came in, Sir Malcolm Sargent. I mean, it was
Wow.
amazing. And I was in that group for probably 5 years, and went through the whole percussion routine and ended up on timpani. I took timpani lessons from David Wooliger, who was the timpanist in the Houston Symphony at the time. And I tell my students that what I learned about orchestral snare drumming and the ear training that I got from timpani playing and sound production, man, that's it right there. And one of my one of the things that I wanted to accomplish as a clinician later on when I've started doing the clinic thing is I wanted to break down that nasty, evil wall between drum set and so-called legitimate percussion. You know, because the same principles of musicality you learned on concert snare, on timpani, on mallets, they apply to drum set too. You and I both
Absolutely.
know that, but a lot of people don't realize that.
Yeah, I don't know. It's incredible. This cross learning is across, everything. And when you play timpani, especially, it makes you such a better drum set player because
Oh,
as
yeah.
I teach my students, you're not just playing rhythms, you're playing melodies. Even the cymbals have melodies.
Yeah.
And you have to be sensitive to that because those are notes. They're
Yeah.
you can almost define the notes if you listen carefully. And if you
Uh-huh.
play, yeah, I mean we know that, but it's interesting how many people you have to, like throw it at them and make that distinction. I remember I had a problem in university because there was no jazz program, and so I was taking drum lessons in New York, coming back, playing with the jazz big band. Then they started a combo jazz program, and so I was taking all the classes I could. I was playing in every ensemble possible. So when I graduated, when I went to the registrar and they looked at all my credits if there was anything missing, and it's funny, the woman looks at me and she says, Aldo, you have 40 credits over what you needed for this degree. How did you do that? And also, you have enough here for a second degree in jazz, but but because it was not listed, there was no program. She says,
Uh-huh.
but we don't offer a degree in jazz. I said, well, maybe now you do. So actually,
Yeah.
I got a
Open the
major
door.
in percussion performance and a minor in jazz performance.
Wow. Remarkable.
It's
Remarkable.
plus I was touring with repercussion. I was playing in the clubs. I was playing like day and night. You know, I was one of those.
Great. What it's all about.
Now I remember when you thinking about talking about your whole education and clinics and things. There was one interesting, well, many interesting, but one particular sticks in my mind when you were at COSA, when you came out to the COSA camps. You did especially when we did the educational video. I said, just pick one topic. I asked everyone just one topic that you would talk about, and yours was about the ride cymbal.
Uh-huh.
That you don't. I remember this specifically. You don't change hands, but you change the way you play your whole approach. And a lot of people still come back to me and say, "You remember what Ed was talking about?" So that's still coming at me, and it stayed. And thank you for doing that, by the way.
Oh, well, thanks for the opportunity.
And
Yeah.
some people don't. I had this conversation with guys like Chester, who said no matter how much forward you're playing, the back end, the foundation was really put together with jazz, and jazz
Uh-huh.
is, no matter what you're playing, fusion or anything else, the fact that you're studying jazz as a formation, as a foundation, really helps a lot.
Definitely. Definitely. And you go back and all the early studio players, not only on the East Coast but in California, were all jazz players.
That's right.
And they could, as Kenny Aronoff said many years ago in an interview in Downbeat, he said, no matter what style of drums you play, you have to have a jazz drummer's mentality, meaning being able to fit different situations, be a musical chameleon. Um, I mean, back when there were really identifiable pop groups and not just superstars, let's say a pop group like the Carpenters or what was the name, the Herb Alpert's group, the
Tijuana
Tijuana.
Brass.
Yeah, those for two examples, especially the Tijuana Brass. When that band was big, and Nick Ceroli was the drummer, great jazz player. when that music was so in everybody's ears that all the commercials were done with that sounded like a Tijuana brass track. So what did the drummer have to do? He had to play in that style. If it was a Carpenter tune, when the Carpenters took over the airwaves, you had to play like that. So, that brings to the fore the fact that a drummer has to be adaptable in that situation. And as Kenny pointed out, it was jazz drummers who most easily fit that because of how they had learned to improvise.
Yeah, yeah, interesting.
So that's what a good studio drummer does. He or she improvises, and if he improvises something really good, it's identified with the tune, just like Gad's 50 Ways to Leave Your Lover, or Bernard Purdy's, the Purdy Shuffle, all those things, So it's amazing. It's just amazing how varied our repertoire has to be. But it all stems from the fact that we can hear something and we can reproduce it.
Right. When somebody
Yeah.
learns a tune, be it jazz or otherwise, a swing, I should say, or otherwise, what's the first thing that you tell the student they should do?
In learning a tune, well, figure out the form, all right? Figure out the tonality. Is it major, minor? Because that can influence the sound that you want. Um, Basically, what I do is with my students is I use a fake book for a drum method, and we'll take a standard tune from the Great American Songbook or a Charlie Parker or Dizzy Bebop type tune, and play it every possible way, playing it in a samba style, in a wawonko style, you name it. Different tempos, different dynamics. Uh, and so that if you go into a session and a producer says, "Hey, drums, I want such and such and such and such," because of practicing all those possibilities, you're able to provide what is wanted and please the producer. So that's learning tunes is primarily really strengthening the inner music with the outer hands and feet, which is what a drummer who just learns licks, which is a stage that we all go through. I'm not making a value judgment, but a drummer who just learns licks takes licks out of a tune without knowing why or having any idea why the drummer used that lick in that part of the tune. Well, then the knowledge is useless, and a drummer has a lick that he or she will use in all the wrong places at all the wrong times.
Right.
And when Weckl was the current drum god, and is still a drum god, but when he was really, in the mainstream, one of my students came in and we were working on something, and he played this incredible lick, and I said, "Damn, where'd you get that?" He says, "Oh, that's on Weckl's latest such and such." And I said, "Wow, what's the name of the tune?" "Oh, wow, man, I don't remember." "Well, what was the form of the tune?" "Oh, damn, I don't know." So I say, "You listen to a piece of music, and the only thing you took away from it was one bar drum fill? Give me a break, you know." You got to hear the whole thing. You got to get an idea of why Mr. Weckl played what he played. So there's a lot of tune learning is the basis of everything. Like Freddie Gruber said, everything you need to know is in the music. Everything is right there. I mean, what else is it? Whether you're playing Beethoven timpani parts or whether you're, swinging a big band, everything you need to know what to do and how to make it sound right is right there in the music if you have the ability to listen to it. And that's another problem with a lot of young big band drummers. They think that if they can read the chart, they can play the music. No, they can read the chart, but they're not playing the music because they're all visually oriented without the auditory aspect. And that to me is one of the big drawbacks of a lot of, or can be in drum set education, is too much reading and not enough ear training. You know, you get a kid who says, "What's a tune you know?" "I don't know any tunes." "Well, how do you play then?" "Yeah,
Yeah.
you know, what's going on here?" Yeah, because everybody I talk to that I know, drummers or interviews that I've read of drummers who are no longer with us, it all comes back to you play as well as you hear. And again, I'm not telling anything you obviously don't know. It's true in classical percussion. If you're playing timpani and you've got an F on that part, you don't know what that F is unless you listen to the rest of the ensemble.
Yeah. If
Yeah,
it's a tonic, you treat
it's
it differently. If it, yeah.
yeah, and it's so damn simple. And I used to tell my kids at school, I'd force them. I'd say, "You need to play with this. I want you to play with this." "Oh, but there's a drummer already on there." I said, "Don't worry. He won't get in your way, but you'll probably get in his. But just do it." And they'd come back and say, "Oh man, that was great. That was great." I said, "Yeah." I said, "I want you to realize something. You're spending tens of thousands of dollars and maybe more to do what I did as a kid, and I didn't pay a nickel for it, playing along with recording. Forcing people to get their heads into the music and and not just into the drums, which is
Yeah.
can be sometimes a real challenge. A person like Keith Carlock came to school. Keith had great chops. They were drumline chops, and he had great licks, but he didn't realize the musical formats that he needed to know. So we embarked on tune learning, and it was like boom, his whole world opened up.
Right.
And his technique developed because he now had sounds in his head that he wanted to put on the instrument. So he said, "Okay, I can't hold the stick like that. If I want to do that, I'm going to have to hold it a little looser and maybe more in the back of the hand. I don't know." But all this stuff comes up. And if the student comes in with this and they says, "Hey, Ed, I was doing this. Is it okay to do this?" And I said, "Yeah, if that's what it takes to get what you need out of the stick, it's right. If there were one way to hold the sticks, everybody would hold the sticks the same way." You know what I'm talking about. It's
Yeah. Yeah.
crazy.
Yeah. Yeah. No. That's right. And it's the music that dictates it in the end.
Yeah.
And
Whether
what you
you're
do
playing
it.
anything, it's the music. It's about the music.
Yeah. No, I mean, I remember going through periods when I was doing. I remember one time, the time when I was doing a lot of studio work in Montreal. I was touring with Repercussion. I was doing a lot of the studio work on drum sets, some on percussion, the commercial, and also classical stuff. But I could never tell those contractors that I was playing the other instruments because they would never believe you. So I was like
Yeah.
living like three different people because
Yeah. Wow.
it's
Yeah.
not possible. I mean, not that I'm a genius or anything, but I mean, I think if you're really interested, you can do it all. I mean, it's just more work, but
Yeah.
you
I
know,
mean, they want to stereotype you as one sort of player.
yeah.
Yeah. I know
No, it was
exactly
like
what you
my
mean.
experience with Mike Clark. When I called him the first time, I knew him. I had been listening to all the records on Headhunters and knew him as the linear drummer playing, and I had no idea of his whole jazz background. I was totally
Yeah.
ignorant of it.
Yeah.
I was. So when I called him, I said, really like it to be at COSA. You'd be the guy because this is one thing that would be wonderful for people to be exposed to. And he said, "Aldo, thanks for the invitation, but I'm a jazz drummer."
Yeah. Yeah.
And so it was like getting a cold shower, and I'm saying, "Oh no, did I miss something?" And I said, "I hope I." So I'm backing, walking out of the situation, trying to not be insulting. I said, "I don't want to step in territory where I'm feeling really uncomfortable that I don't know." So
Yeah.
I said, "Well,
Yeah.
listen, this is the way I know you, and the work that you've been doing, and I'm following it, and I love it, and I think it would be interesting. He says, yeah, but that's later. But I comes from all my jazz playing that I still do and always have. And I said, okay, so what come as the jazz player who did what you did with Herbie Hancock, and what led you to that? So then he said, okay, but I'm
I
a
know.
jazz drummer. That was interesting.
I know exactly what you mean. I had a similar experience with Bernard Purdy. Purdy and I were house drummers for a jazz festival in Columbia, South Carolina for many years. And the first time we were together, I'm just thinking to myself, I only knew Bernard from his funk work, all his stuff with Aretha and all those great recordings that he made. Good God, unbelievable. So we're going, damn, I wonder what Bernard's doing at a jazz festival. Boy, dumb, dumb, dumb. So he gets up and plays, and they play something like Cherokee, the group that he's with. And oh my God, he just nails it. He just nails it. And there's no funk grooves, nothing. It's just straight ahead jazz bebop. And so once we got to know each other a little better, I said, man, you really put me in my place. And he said, well, what do you mean? I said, well, here all these years, I thought that you were just a funky backbeat drummer, a soul drummer. And he said, whoa, now you know the whole picture, don't you? I said, I sure do. I mean, if you do one thing well, more than likely you do everything well.
Sure. If
Yeah.
I think if you're interested, some people are just not interested and they stay in that one place. But if they are, I mean, it's like Bernard. I mean, he's just anything he touches.
Oh, mercy.
Just
Yeah.
I
And Charlie
remember,
Watts was, of course, a jazz diehard as well. Yeah.
yeah. I mean, a lot of those guys. I remember Bernard Purdy at I forget where it was. Maybe it was at a PASIC conference where they had a big band sitting, playing in the lobby, and we were all sitting around a table, and we were talking, and Bernard was there and a few others, and then I had to leave for a moment to go to the washroom. I came right back. Bernard's not there, and we had all been listening to the band, and the band was great, and but all of a sudden, the band sounded different. Like you take notice. You say, "Wait a second, there's something different about this." So I look over, and it's Bernard playing drums.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, just
Yeah. There you go.
amazing.
It's dangerous to stereotype people, that's for sure.
Yeah, no, absolutely, I mean, it's easy to do because we all grow up with this. Everything has a label. This is this music. This is
Yeah.
that, and we have to describe it in 3 words. Does it have to be? I think that's taking the imagination out of it. It's a
I agree.
marketing thing,
I agree. Yeah.
right? But
Yeah.
you did some work with Phil Wilson also,
Hmm.
and who else was somebody Bill Evans also.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
Any interesting moments that you want to share? How did these come out? They just hear you and you happen to be there?
Well, I met Bill when he came to Dallas. I was still I had come back to Denton in 71, I think it was, after being on the road with Woody and doing some other things to patch up a relationship, which eventually fell apart anyway. But Bill would come to town, played at a club in Dallas with Eddie Gomez and Marty Morell. And I went down and met the guys, and Marty asked me if I wanted to sit in. And unlike the time when my father told me get up and play the drums, yeah, I said, yeah, wow, what an honor. I'd love to. So I played, and that's how I met the guys. And then Bill said to me, Marty's thinking about leaving. Or no, Marty told me, he says, I'm thinking about leaving. And so it's good that you played so that Bill heard you. And in the meantime, over the course of maybe 8 months, maybe longer, I would send Bill letters and postcards and stuff as a reminder. And sure enough, finally, when I was living in New York, the phone rang and it was Helen Keene, who was Bill's manager, and she said, "We'd like you to play with the trio." So my opening gig with the trio was at the Village Vanguard.
Wow.
And I'd give anything to be able to go back there and do all that over again. Because well, just with age comes greater insights. And it went all right. It went okay. Evidently not completely to Bill's liking, because I was with the band a year and then Elliot Zygmunt came in. But I had that year, got to know Bill, got to know Eddie. Bill was a marvelous human being, extremely, absolutely no pretense, straight ahead, honest. If you asked Bill how he was doing, he would tell you. Wouldn't give you some BS platitude. I mean, he figured if you asked, you cared. And never talked about the music. Never talked about the music. Eddie Gomez was my lifeline, because when Bill would start a tune, Eddie would lean over as though he was adjusting his amp and whisper, "Come in on the bridge," or something like that. And even though I had done my homework, and uh, it was a great learning experience, primarily for one reason: I learned to play less, and really learned to focus on the music. And which wasn't the lesson I learned when I listened to the recordings of the trio, especially the recording of Paul Motion. You know, how sparse he played, yet how powerful it was. So yeah, it was a great learning experience, which I I'd give anything to be able to do it again now. Wouldn't we all? You know?
Yes, with some extra wisdom, right?
Yeah, yeah. But I mean, it just it blew my mind that I actually had the opportunity to play with him.
I mean,
And
that was
actually,
genius, genius.
go ahead, go ahead.
No, no, no. I was saying I mean, his playing, his whole
I
orchestrations, absolute
never
genius.
recorded with him, but there's a set of CDs called the Secret Bill Evans recordings or something like that, that somebody recorded on their Walkman when the band was at the Village Vanguard. And I got that just out of curiosity. And I'm not listed, but there are a couple of tracks that they attribute to Elliot Zygmunt that aren't Elliot Zygmunt. And they're me, Mr. Busy.
So we
Mr.
could
Busy.
say, yeah, no, it's the same thing, I guess. I mean, less is more, but it's like when you start recording. I remember my first few times when I would record and listen back, and nobody would look at me, but I felt it, and I'm listening
Yeah,
and I'm saying, wait, oh my God, that's way too much. So you
yeah,
have to quickly learn to take notes away, and how do you get out of this now, and
yeah,
quickly,
yeah.
because it's just not interesting or it's not musically needed, and
Right.
so that's a life's work, I think, to learn to.
What I realized, really, one thing was that if when you're playing with musicians of that caliber, they expect you to play at that same level. And if you don't, they're not going to say anything. They're going to find somebody else. It's that simple. And that's the way it should be. I mean, it's, uh, yeah, and a story that brought this home to me big time was with Louis Belson. God rest his soul. Louis came to school, and our paths had crossed frequently before when I was on Woody's band. So we knew each other, and he had made an album with Louis Armstrong and Ella Fitzgerald called Louis and Ella, or Ella and Louis. And it's a great album. It's just wonderful album. The music is swinging so hard. Everybody's having such a good time. So Louis came to school, and I pulled that record out, and I said, "Lou, you got to tell me about this session, man. This just sounded like you guys are having so much fun, and it was swinging so hard. Just you have any stories about this session? He looked at the album, and Louis was not a BS artist. He was
Right.
straight ahead. And he looked at the album and he said, Eddie, it was just another gig. And I about passed out when he said that, because I realized that was the level. That was the level at which all those people played, and it was just, hey, it was just another gig where we all swung our asses off and had a great time.
Yeah, yeah. Amazing. No,
So
you're absolutely
yeah,
right. Yeah. And that should be the
yeah,
standard. That's where you should be
yeah,
at all times, right?
yeah, exactly. Yeah,
And
yeah, it's like, what's so different about this? It's the way it always was. Yeah.
I remember seeing Louis in concert once, and I mean, he totally blew me away. I'm not sure if it was one of those camps, either the Jamie Aebersold camp or the big band camps, the stage band camps, and
Uh,
his band came through, and it was the first time I'd heard him play, and I had never heard a big band player play with such intensity and clarity and finesse and nuance. And when the
yeah.
band was playing really low, he still had that intensity. He still had all that intention, all of that. And I just couldn't believe it. Like the control that he had. It was like a classical musician playing these tiny notes, but instead of being this loud, they're here, but they're still the same intensity.
Yeah.
And I always wonder, how does he do that? And it's so musical too.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, and he was a
Yeah.
great guy too.
Master. Yeah. Definitely. Definitely. He was.
Now, I'm
Yeah.
just when you left, you were teaching at University of Texas for a long time,
North Texas.
North Texas, right? For many many years, because I run into people who studied with you, and I mean, of course, they call you the Grand Master over there, and people have, like, I'm sure you changed a lot of people around, which is important. I mean, that you do that and become a beacon of this level of playing. But when you left, what are you still playing now?
Oh yeah. Yeah. I play a lot, and with my studio in the backyard, I take advantage of students from the university who want to get together and play. So I'm doing a lot of that. There's a nice wine bar in town that it's a jazz listeners room, so I work there frequently. So yeah, I'm keeping busy, and after teaching for 30 years at North Texas, I now have time to make up for those 30 years and do some practicing, some real practice. So really, seriously, it's like I've started it all over again in some respects, because I've gone back and looked at all my practice journals that I keep, and I kept them while I was teaching. And of course, practice time was minimal because of one's teaching schedule. So I went back, got all these notebooks out, and where I'd note something down that I needed to work on, and now I have the time to work on it. And it really is. I'm going back to square one. I mean, it's which I think everybody does at some point. Just like Yehudi Menuhin, the great violinist, eventually took his violin apart, see how it worked. And I'm not to that point yet, but it's the older you get, the more you hear. And I can go back and listen to recordings that I listened to when I was in high school and go, damn, I didn't hear that. I didn't hear that. Oh, wow. And I start to hear relationships that I didn't hear back then because I wasn't aware of them. Relationships between the rhythm section and the ensemble, between the bass player and the drummer, and between the pianist and the bass player and the drummer. So I used to turn my students on to a interview with a great trumpet player named Sean Jones, where Sean said that he listened to Coltrane quartet records so much until he had his own idea of what Elvin was doing and what Jimmy Garrison was doing and what Train was doing and what McCoy was doing. And I told my students, I say, look, this man doesn't even play saxophone.
Yeah, yeah.
But he was so enthralled by the communication of these four men that he literally listened and listened and listened until he seemingly heard what they heard and and started to hear the connections that were made. Because if you hear it in other people's music, you can bring that to your own music.
That's right.
So yeah, you can emulate it. So yeah, and I'll tell you, although kids have so many resources now,
Oof.
the most frequent question I get is, "Where do I start? Where do I start?" And of course, the answer is start anywhere, and especially something that you don't know. If you read about somebody who everybody raves about, you know, go check him out. Don't be like the student I had once who came into his lesson, and there'd been an article in Downbeat, or not Downbeat, Modern Drummer, about a great drum set player named Tiny Khan, who died unfortunately when he was 30 years old. He was also a great arranger for the Elliott Lawrence Big Band. Really, truly, Terry Gibbs said he was a genius, and he changed jazz drumming, and with his approach to the instrument, he sort of broke out of that transitional period where guys still down below sounded like they were playing swing, where he lightened everything up. Beautiful dancing ride patterns, unbelievable. So, kid walked in. I said, "Hey, man, did you see that article about Tiny Khan and Modern Drummer?" He says, "Yeah, I saw it." I said, "Well, what did you think about it?" And he said, "I didn't read it." I said, "Why didn't you read it?" And he said, "Because I didn't know who he was."
Wow.
Yeah, man, wow is right.
Wow.
Yeah. Or the kid who
That's
came in, I had a
interesting.
deal with my students. I said, "You turn me on to what you're listening to now, and I'll turn you on what I listened to when I was your age. And that way, we're going to have a nice synthesis of musical styles and ideas." So one day, a guy came in. I said, "Okay." I put on the first Mahavishnu album with Kavan, Inner Mounting Flame, and this kid's jaw just hit the floor. He goes, "Who is that drummer?" And I said, "Yeah," and he's doing all that on a four-piece kit.
Yeah.
A four-piece Gretsch kit. And he goes, "Who is that?" I said, that's a gentleman named Billy Cobham. Have you ever heard of him?" "Oh yeah, I've heard of him." They've all heard of these guys, but that's where it stops. So I said, "Okay, here's your assignment." That's not really an assignment. I'm assuming the guy's going to do the same way. He's so blown away by Cobham. I said, "Well, he's got a huge discography. Check out some more. See what check him out." So in my devious way, I waited for maybe 2 weeks, 3 weeks. Guy came in for his lesson. I said, "Wait, man. So what sort of Cobham have you been listening to?" "Oh, wow, I haven't had time to do that." I said, "Well, if you wanted to do it, you'd have time for it." So it's you can introduce a horse to water, but you can't make him drink. And it's the good ones, the ones who realize their potential, who welcome finding things that they hadn't heard before, players that they weren't. But that great gray area of mediocrity, those people stayed the same because for some reason their curiosity had been killed somewhere along the road. That's the great teacher is curiosity.
Yeah, exactly. I was going to say, I mean,
Yeah.
the curiosity should, I mean, it's a flame that can't be put out because you're curious. And why would you be? I mean, I remember having, because I had Michael Shreve on a podcast, and
Mm-hmm.
I've always known him as that drummer was from Santana, and obviously he's done things since then because he was 21 when he did that
Yeah.
and many
Yeah.
things, but you pigeonhole that person as that kind of player who's phenomenal what he did, right? And beyond.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then in the conversation, he said, no, I got a new album that I did that's totally different. I've been listening to a lot of contemporary music, people, a lot of contemporary percussion, world percussion, all of these things. And he's naming names of people that he'd been working with. And I'm going, what? So his curiosity has
Yeah.
just kept him going and expanding and never looking back, right?
Yeah.
And And then we were speaking about percussion, and I mentioned repercussion. Then he said, that's your group? I have all your records.
Oh, wow.
And I said, of course I was flattered, but I'm saying, these are the people we listen to, and their curiosity is still expanding and pushing them forward. And we're like back here still listening to these guys and the new people, and they're listening not only forwards but back, sideways, and their curiosity is what's keeping them going and still being creative. I mean, Billy Cobham,
Yeah.
wow,
Yeah.
amazing.
Yeah.
And
I know.
I think people who don't delve in, it just shows something that's really missing in their wanting to do something of value.
Uh-huh.
That's what it is. If you're really interested in something, you find out, you dig, you.
Yeah.
Otherwise, you stay in one place. If you stay in one place, it it becomes less interesting. You become less interested, and there's how much can you say if you don't have a subject that you can speak about,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Whether
And you've
it's
got student has to have a lot of patience too. Everybody wants everything right now, like Google, like they can Google, backbeats. Yeah. So I'd tell my students, you've got to be, got to lead a double life. You've got a digital world that you deal with, but when you sit down with your music, it's a temporal world, and you have to go with the flow of that and resign yourself to the fact that number one, if you're serious, you're never going to be fully satisfied anyway, because the beauty of being a musician or anybody in the arts is that there's no end. There's no end.
thankfully,
Yeah.
thankfully, yes, yeah.
Yeah.
But it's interesting that when we don't hear from somebody or a bunch of names that you're familiar with, you think they're not doing anything. So I'm really happy that it's happy to see. Of course, you're one of those people. I'm sure you're so curious that uh, you would never stop. But you're playing a lot, and you're stepping back and revisiting all those things that you never had time for.
Right.
I'm sure a lot of the guys, unless they physically or mentally can't,
Yeah.
still do that and keep
Yeah.
themselves alive. Doesn't mean you're not active.
Yeah. Joey Barron, great drummer, who encompasses many different approaches and styles, once told me that he had some time off and he was going to go back in the practice room. And I said, "What are you working on?" He says, "Oh, quarter notes, always quarter notes." Yeah.
Underestimated.
Yeah, no kidding. It's like Max Roach said, if you can't play quarter notes, you can't play anything. And it was so funny because you could go up to a young person and go and say, "What kind of notes are those?" And I'll say, "Oh, those are either 16ths or 30 seconds." I said, "No, they're fast quarter notes."
Yeah, interesting. It's
Yeah,
relativity, right?
yeah, yeah,
Interesting. Well, Ed, I know we can go on forever, and I'm sure that we'll cross paths. But I want to thank you for taking the time to join me today, and at least I have you down and having this conversation, and hopefully inspire some other people to take into consideration in their own lives of this thing,
yeah.
because things
Well,
just don't happen by themselves. You're either in a situation, you take advantage of it, or somebody pushes you in your ear, says you forget about those drums
yeah, yeah,
out of threat, and so you succeed by being there, right? By being there and participating
yeah,
and doing your best at all times, right?
yeah. And the whole thing now is to support as much as we can live music, get people back together and playing again,
Yep.
because the well, I think we all realize that the virtual aspect of it, while in some times it is necessary for safety, but with things simmering down a bit and the protections we have now, and which I hope will get more protective, we really need to support live music as much as we can.
Yeah.
All live music.
Yeah, because it's not the same, and it's also it's a human thing.
Yeah,
We need
yeah,
that interaction. We need to be in the same room. It's
exactly. And thank you for all that you're doing to keep things together.
thank you,
Yeah,
and to be continued.
yeah. Have a great time in Italy.
Thank you, sir.